I'm trying to coexist, exist. Yeah, I'm trying to coexist, exist. I'm trying to coexist.
Welcome back to the Ethics Guild podcast, where we explore human experiences. What do we have for you today? We are going to talk about the psychological toll on the immigration and deportation crisis that the U.S. is living today. We are definitely going to confront one of the most volatile and ethically charged issues that the U.S. is facing today: immigration, systematic failure, and what's more important, the crisis of trust. The country seems to be divided. Everyone has different opinions, and they have the right to do so, to express what they think, believe, and feel. But the question is, how does that resolve the problem? I understand that this topic might be very sensitive for some people or others because it's very rhetoric. On one side, we're going to have interpret heart-wrenching stories, and on the other extreme, we're going to understand the political behaviors that have put everyone in disarray. But it also, to understand why people immigrate to the U.S., we have to understand where they're coming from, what are they running away from, and what does that culture look like. And also, we're going to understand what is the American perspective of seeing immigrants coming to the U.S. and how do they feel about it? What are their fears? And in order to know more about this topic, we have to talk about the corrupt government's corporate exploitation on immigrants. And how do we respect the law while honoring the dignity of an individual? Our goal is to move forward from blame and towards actionable data-driven reforms. So if you want to further understand why people leave their country to come to the US and the journey, the psychological toll, and also what they leave behind to adapt to a new culture, but then also you want to learn what is the American perspective about immigrants coming in and how they feel about that, how they view immigration, and also how do they feel about these massive deportation happening? What's the psychological toll on the American citizen and also the illegal residents? That's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're not going to choose a side. We're just going to expose these different experiences and also understand the psychological tolls on both sides. So if this is what you want to learn, stay tuned and let's start. We ask ourselves, why do people immigrate to the US? Why do they leave everything behind? And the number one reason they leave, and statistics shows us that the number one reason they leave is because of the corrupt governments that have impoverished the countries, but also maybe in the last 10, 20 years have created safety hazards. Give you a good example. Let's take, for instance, Venezuela and Ecuador. As we know, Ecuador, or for those that don't know, Ecuador is turning into almost a narco-state. And this is due to the evolution of corruption. The fact that the citizens didn't have the bravery to stand up to these corrupt governments and ask and manifest their discontent for a reform. This also promoted gang violence. And these gangs evolve into welcoming the narcos to come and be participant and also sponsor these gangs. Later, they became affiliated, and now they're their major ally for transporting drugs. In Ecuador, you can see this from, and I can tell you this, I lived in Ecuador when I was during my youth, and during the 80s, you could see the corrupt system. And the culture was they did one good deed, but yet they knew that they were robbing, and they allow this. And what happens with that is that the system keeps corrupting itself. Judges, executives, congressmen, senators, the whole Congress works for bribery. So think about this. If you are an Ecuadorian citizen, how can you trust in your law system if you know that you've been robbed and the thief has more money to bribe the judge and get away with the crime, or even be sentenced but pays the judge to be released in a week or two? How can you trust a government? Wouldn't you be afraid that now that you did the right thing, denouncing the crime, and now the person gets out in a week or two and he and his gang members are going to come get you? Wouldn't you want to run away from that terror? So think about it. The choice of an immigrant is very simple. It's between the predictable terror of a corrupt government, gang violence, or even economic collapse. I remember when Ecuador went, the sucre got devaluated to the point where $1 was 25,000 sucres. The government, instead of warning their citizens so they can trade the money and not lose as much, didn't do this. They did it abruptly. Many people that had sucres in their bank now only had a few dollars. This is life changing. Think about like what that caused for people to immigrate. There was a large migration to Europe because of this, because of the government not thinking about their citizens. So to think about this, which one will you choose? To immigrate to a country you don't know, or stay in an unstable place that guarantees you absolutely nothing? But at least if you immigrate to Europe or the United States, there is hope. There is a possibility. There's a chance that you can not only survive, but make a dignified living. And it just doesn't stop there. We have to think about the high-ranking officials of the country that have to face justice, and instead they fled to another country and seek refugee. I can give you examples of that. The economist Albert Dahit, back in the 90s, he was accused of embezzling millions of dollars in state secret funds. You also have former Vice President Jorge Glass, convicted in the massive Odebrecht bribery scheme while residing abroad. These people don't only reside in these different countries, they also look for the refugee in the embassies, creating a political, social chaos for the country. The judicial system also implicated figures like Rolando Panchana, that used to be a journalist for Ecuavisa and got involved in politics based on his popularity. And let me tell you, the list goes on, because corruption in places like Ecuador evolves, and it evolves brilliantly without any repercussions or minimum repercussion, because if you have the money, you can definitely pay your way out. The elite Exile is the ultimate betrayal tool. Leaders strip the state out of its resources, unstabilizing the country, not only from a monetary system, but also in trust and transparency. And when held accountable, they abandon the citizens they impoverish. But now we see a different kind of evolution in Ecuador. Crucially, the corruption under administrations like Rafael Correa and Jorge Glass that we just mentioned is directly linked by prosecutors to the rise of the Narco-State. Allegations suggest massive state contracts and infrastructure were infiltrated by drug cartel financing and influence. This is the blueprint of becoming a narco-state, and also paves the way for organized crime to have political control. This corruption was catastrophic for the Ecuadorian citizens. It created a made-out migration, a moral imperative for parents seeking their children's safety and their own safety. Let's look at the statistics in 2023. Ecuador's murder rate hit a record high of approximately 45 people being murdered out of 100,000 people, a dramatic increase that directly correlated with emigration rates. So safety plays a huge role why people leave their country. And if we're going to talk about the corruption in Ecuador, why not talk about Venezuela as a great example too? I remember when in the 70s, 80s, Venezuela was the utopian country for South America, blemishing an economy due to their oil industry. I remember they used to have the best soap operas. They used to do movies. They had the best singers. They were involved in art. Europeans used to come and reside in Venezuela. They were known as America's financial heaven due to their oil wealth. But what happened? Corruption, corrupted leaders with a socialist mindset. But more importantly, it's not even about the left or the right. It's all these Machiavellian behaviors you see in them, narcissists, dictators that changed everything from a once blemishing country to the catastrophic collapse under Chavez and Maduro. They're marked by state corruption, hyperinflation, and resource starvation. I remember seeing and talking to people from Venezuela, and they couldn't even buy toilet paper, the basic needs of everyday, like toothpaste, food, water. Who does this to their own citizens? Think about that. Think about the psychological toll if you were a Venezuelan citizen. This resulted in one of the largest refugee crises in modern history. I can't believe this is happening in 2024, 2025. This is a clear case where systematic political and economic corruption directly reversed a national dream, and it destroys a culture. It destroys what you once felt that was yours, where you belong, forcing millions to flee the poverty and the lack of basic services. It is sad to see and to listen to some of the stories people from Venezuela have, and also the dream they have that one day they're able to go back and reform and restructure and bring Venezuela to what it was one day, the Americans' heaven, or I would say the American financial heaven it once was, where everyone wants to migrate. But now we are seeing the bad examples of why people leave their country. They obviously don't leave just because they just got up and say, well, I just want to go up north, or I just want to, jump to Europe. Because I will give you two examples of economies that are and countries that are doing the right thing. They're fighting corruption. They're trying to maintain a economic stabilization where investment can come to their country, because let's be honest, if there's no safety, why will you invest? Would you want to put money in places like Ecuador and Venezuela where nothing is safe, where if you own a business, you might get vaccinated? That's what they call it in Ecuador, where the narcs or the gangs, they come to you, to your establishment, and they say, well, you got to pay me $5,000 every month in order for you to continue to operate, and you will get our protection. That is the cruel reality these countries are living through. But let's talk about Bukele and El Salvador. Let's think about what he inherited. Years of crippling insecurity led to massive out-migration. Now with the dramatic and yet for many controversial security measures under President Bukele, some Salvadorans are returning home after many years of living in the U.S. And we should ask ourselves why. And the answer is very simple. One, they love their country. Wouldn't you go back if you knew everything was okay and you can put a business and survive and live with dignity? But also it's because the primary need for safety has finally been restored. Think about what in the U.S., we can walk wearing all the clothes that we buy and the brands that we buy without having the thought that somebody's going to mug us, that, we have to hide our phone because it's going to be snatched every single time we go out. That's the kind of safety that everyone wishes to have. This proves that policies can alter migration patterns, but the root cause of why people leave and they migrate to the United States and Europe is because there's a lack of safety, and financial stability plays a huge role. Because if you're a single father, a single mom, or you're a family, and you don't know, and you don't have a job, and you don't know how you're going to feed your kids the next day, what will you do? Put yourself in those shoes. I'm not asking you to change your mind about what you believe. What I'm asking is put yourself in those shoes. If you were here in the United States and you didn't have any money and there was no work around, and every day around your neighborhood, you see that you're being threatened, you're being sabotaged, what will you do? Let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think. What will you do? Will you do the same as people that come from these countries and immigrate to the United States? Or will you stay? Leave a comment. Tell me what you think. And we also have the example of Argentina and President Milei, which Milei had to take drastic measures, cutting costs in the public sector, because economic stability is a critical driver. So what does Milei in Argentina teaches us is that severe economic collapses and volatility, even under radical reforms attempted by President Milei, that massive outmigration is tied directly to collapse of economic opportunity. What does this mean? Not being able to find a job, not being able to generate resources to survive. Basic needs. Think about how highly educated and skilled workers can't find a job. They're ethically compelled to leave to secure their family's future elsewhere. And think about it. If somebody that is highly skilled and educated can't find a job in their own country, what makes you believe those that don't have the education or the skills can find the same opportunities or a job? They also are tempted to leave their country, their family, and their culture, their friends, and everything they know and everything they love. I want you to see what is the psychological toll when you put yourself in those shoes. Think about what they leave. They leave their language, their family anchor, and their own history behind. But what makes it worse is as they leave, they carry a crippling debt simply for the chance to survive. Because let's be honest, to come either to the United States illegally or to go to Europe, it comes with a big price tag. It's not free and it's not safe. Think about what goes through your mind when you make this decision. Leave a comment. What do you think people that are leaving everything behind think before they take the action of leaving everything they know and they love? But the worst is that the trauma doesn't end once they cross the border. It just simply changes its form, because we have to also think about the danger and expenses of leaving your country and immigrating elsewhere. And not only from a financial aspect, let's talk about the physical risk of crossing the border. Beyond exposure and injury and exposure to the elements like a desert, like the rain, like the jungles, like the environment, people, the journey just through Mexico is fraught with extortion. We know how Mexico is corrupted, but you will know how much or how bad the corruption is once you get there. You know, you can be extorted, kidnapped, and for some females, they live the horrifying experience of sexual assault. And these are all perpetrated by cartels and organized criminal groups. And the worst is that you pay your coyotes, and they're the ones that introduce you to the danger and expose you to be extorted. It's sad, right? But Machiavelli warns us through his book about how we operate when we have power over another person. It's sad. What's more sad is the financial cost. It's staggering. The average price tag a person pays to a coyote or the smugglers often ranges from $8,000 to $15,000. And this is per person. So if you're going with your whole family, think about the debt you have already that you have put to at risk, because the coyote doesn't guarantee your safe crossing. And like I said, in most cases, you get extorted for more. Or you're kidnapped. I know this because I know of a particular person that has been in Mexico for 8 months, kidnapped. They actually asked their family to send them $8,000 more, but their family's poor. They sold their land and they don't have any more money. Finally, after many months of being kidnapped, they let her go because they knew they couldn't get her. Thank God they didn't kill her. And she's just still waiting to cross the border. And she's been out of her country for almost 10 months. I wonder how is she surviving there? How is she getting a plate of food every day? But thank God there's just like there's bad people, there's also good ones. And for what I understand, there's a family that is helping her to survive until one day she's able to cross, if she ever crosses too. Think about this instantly saddles migrants with crippling debts upon arrival, requiring immediate intense labor in the US. And this is also going to compound into their traumas, because not only that you have to take any work because you have to pay your debts, but it must be horrific to not just go through the experience, but also to think that now most of the work that you do and most of the payment you receive has to go to pay a debt where no one guarantees you that you're going to be safe in this country in terms of immigration or ICE trapping you and taking you back home. But again, I understand if you decided to take upon this journey, you must understand these are the consequences you expose yourself to. And the question is always, can you live with those consequences? Now, let's also reflect on the professional tragedy for many professionals that come here illegally, doctors, engineers, lawyers. The choice to emigrate to the United States means sacrificing their entire career. Upon arrival, they find out that their degree and years of professional licensing are not recognized or easily transferred or credited so they can work in their professions. This forces them to start again from zero. It must be a big toll to pay to have invested not only resources and money, but time to be a professional and then be a nobody. Again, the psychological toll could be very dramatic, because now you was once relevant because of all your efforts, and today it didn't matter what you did. You have to rebuild yourself. And this is where resiliency plays a huge factor. on how to overcome this challenge. The question is everyone mentally prepared to start from zero and rebuild themselves and learn a new language, learn a new culture? Leave your comment. Tell me what you think. Do you think everyone can do it easily? And I just think about, imagine an engineer and a doctor just working as a driver, construction, and in most cases for females, maintenance and cleaning. So sometimes when you see immigrant cleaner or working in construction and driving, you might be working with somebody that has a doctorate degree, a master's degree, and yet you can only think that they're just a clean. But this affects your psyche if you are that person. Just think about the psychological cost of seeing 10 or 20 years of professional investment rendered useless is a devastating blow to self-worth and identity, even if you are safer here. Feeling safe is a great feeling to have, but it's very difficult to rebuild your self-worth and your own identity in a place where nobody knows you. Hopefully, you have family members that can help you rebuild yourself quicker and also create within yourself the identity you need to be successful in this new country. But more importantly, the resilience to understand that what you lived before is something you enjoyed, but because of things you can't control, now you're forced to rebuild yourself. And in that process of rebuilding, your resiliency is going to take you further than what you once knew and what you applied. Or you can always try to go back to school and get your license. But again, language is always a big barrier, especially for those of Latin American background. So readaptation and cognitive dissonance, because think about it, once here, the psychological burden shifts. It's not the same as you were back home. And it shifts to readaptation. And we're not just talking about language. If you come from a tropical place, now you're faced to get readapted with the cold, the winters, the allergies during fall, the rains in spring, people from different ethnicities and culture, how to respect different religions, different criteria, different laws. The culture shock is immense. Just navigating a new language, think about it, you're just standing there and people are talking to you. You can't understand what they're saying. It could turn frustrating, but it can also turn into, I'm going to learn and give everything that I can to learn this language. I think one of the most difficult ones is learning the new social norms. And give you an example in Ecuador, it's all the neighbors know each other. I'm from New York and New Jersey, and there's sometimes you don't even know what your neighbor's name is and how they look like. So it's a different environment. You don't have the social settings as back home. But what's more devastating is because you know that you are illegal. It's often living in the shadows. Worried if they're going to catch you. Are you going to be deported back to your country? And now all that investment is worth nothing. And I consider the cognitive dissonance is staggering. The dream of a safe life, which we all deserve, clashes daily with the reality of exploitation, legal insecurity, not having rights. Let's be honest, and being seen as less than. That's right, especially in the work industry. This constant stress compromises mental health and hinders successful integration. And you will ask yourself, like, how can somebody feel less than other? Well, you don't have a right. You're always looking behind your shoulders, afraid. Fear plays a huge factor. But also think about the fact that you can't communicate well with other people. Think about the fact that a lot of people won't understand what you're trying to communicate with them. And if you, in the work environment, if they know you're illegal, they're going to pay you less than the minimum wage. And this is what I'm talking about, the exploitation, the work exploitation. And we will talk a little bit more about that very soon. But give me your thoughts about that. Have you ever thought that someone being illegally here can feel in this way about their life, being less than? Leave a comment. Tell me what you think. And now, obviously, we talk about the side of the coin of the person that migrates to the United States illegally. But now let's talk about the American perspective. You live here and this is all you know. Let's talk about the U.S. citizen perspective. So let's confront the legitimate concerns raised by many long-term residents and U.S. citizens. Most of it because it's a tax-paying situation, right? You want your dollar to be contributed to the best of your own country's and citizens and residents' interests. Sometimes the anger isn't anti-immigrant. It's more about the anti-chaos and anti-inequity. So give you an example. Let's have a resource drain argument. Tell me what you think about this. Many feel that federal and local resources like housing, healthcare, education are being redirected to support undocumented migrants, often without the same level of bureaucratic scrutiny faced by legal citizens or veterans. This fuels the perception that legal taxpayers are funding a system that prioritizes rule breakers, or rule breaking in this case, over those that follow the rule. This is a justified feeling of inequity. And I can tell you from my perspective as a veteran myself and a professional is that you often ask this question. You want education to be better for all US citizens and everyone that lives here. And we're seeing that kids can't even read after graduating high school at a 6th grade level. But this is what we are putting out in the next 5 to 10 year workforce. And I get it, right? There's a lot of veterans that are homeless. How are they getting the proper economic support to be sheltered properly? And when I mean sheltered, I'm not talking about the shelter system where everyone lives where everyone lives in a small building. No, I'm talking about they having their own apartment paid for. Doesn't a war veteran or a veteran deserves better? And I get it. I would love for that to happen. I would love to see that every veteran is not on the street and they live with dignity. They're already paid it forward for their country and they deserve better. Then we have the economic, and I think this also leads to the economic double-edged sword. Let me explain. This feeling of strain is sometimes complicated by hard data. What do I mean? While some local resources experience short-term overload, studies consistently shows that immigrant labor contributes to 10 of billions in state and local taxes annually. And immigrant entrepreneurs is a massive economic engine. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing that undocumented migrants are trying to do the right thing by paying taxes. And also immigrant-led businesses are twice as likely to start a new business in the US and contribute billions annually to the GDP, underscoring their long-term value. The economic effect is a wash in the short term, but a net positive in the long term. Yet this positive aspect often gets lost in the anxiety of immediate costs. So we're seeing that the entrepreneurship that undocumented migrants bring definitely contributes in a good form, and in the good form of tax paying back to the government, back to the citizens, back to the residents. But unfortunately, we want to see immediate gratification. This is why it's important that we understand how do undocumented migrants contribute. And as we can see, the statistics don't lie. The long-term effect is massive. But since we're talking about anxiety and fear, because we want immediate gratification as U.S. citizens when somebody comes to our country, we want them to contribute right away. But unfortunately, because of the legal processes, they can't be legal in a flash. This is where the cultural clash and safety concerns arise for U.S. citizens, because there's a genuine frustration regarding assimilation. When communities sees rapid influx without language support or cultural integration efforts, fear of a dissolving national identity takes root. This fear is exacerbated by incidents like recent crime spikes in New York City, where reports of phone snatching or even increased robberies lead to the generalized and biased conclusion that all new arrivals are bad, are not here for the best interests of the country and its citizens. And this creates a big instability and also fear. But the problem is every generalization is unfair. Because let's think about it. Just like there's bad Americans, there's also good ones. And this goes for every country and for every culture and for every religion. There's those that commit crime and there's those that don't. But I can tell you that most of the undocumented migrants that come here to work. I would say, and this is not without having statistics, roughly my thought, my criteria indicates that's probably like 90% of people come to do good. It's that 10% that creates the notorious acts that calls the wrong attention and puts everyone on the same bucket. But like I said before, generalizations are unfair. But to be honest, the underlying concern for community safety is valid. Think about it. I'm a New Yorker, and my whole life I never had to worry about my phone being snatched or be unsafe on the train. And don't get me wrong, New York City is crazy. It's chaotic. There's a lot going on, but in the last, I would say, 3 years, it definitely changed. And again, I'm not accusing every undocumented migrant, but I do believe that not having the proper political system to handle the migration issues we had before has led to that. So we also have part of this responsibility for letting those that have committed criminal acts in their country arrive to our country. And guess what they're going to do? What they know. Their skill is to be a threat and to be thieves. That's what they're going to do. But that's only that 10% of people, not the 90 that comes here to hustle and work hard for a better life, not only for them, but for their family and their kids, and for those that also are left behind. But a statistic that we have to look, and this is actually quite funny, that while localized crime increased, study shows us that immigrants, including undocumented individuals, have lower incarceration rates than native-born citizens. Shocking, right? But the core of the American, I would say, concern is that they're not against immigration, because everyone knows that everyone is an immigrant somehow in this country, and that this land belongs to the Native Americans that we stripped from them. I believe the Americans are against the breakdown of a secure, orderly, and fair process. But as a behavioralist, a human being, is very hard to create a fair theory into a fair process where a vast majority wins. We're actually good to do the opposite, where a small minority wins while a big minority loses. Well, this leads to, something that perhaps a lot of people don't talk about. Where do undocumented migrants go to work? And nobody talks about corporate exploitation and ethical hypocrisy. Why? Because it's not convenient for the business. And why it's not convenient for the business? Because one, you're breaking the rules and the law by hiring an undocumented migrant. But not only that, you hire them, give them an opportunity. You make them work long hours and pay them less than what the law tells you to pay them. And this is where I debate over immigration is hypocritical. If we ignore the direct incentive structure created by American businesses that rely on undocumented labor, let's start there. Let's look at concrete examples that I'm aware of. As a matter of fact, I make the proper calls and nothing has been done. There's a company in Carteret, New Jersey, that dedicates themselves to creating Korean cosmetics. This company utilizes undocumented workers. So where should I start? Ironically, I'm going to start about labor, violation, and exploitation. We can't be naive to think that these companies don't know they're hiring illegal migrants, undocumented migrants. And they do it because they could pay them significantly less than the minimum wage established by law. They also could avoid proper labor safety standards and sidestep oversight. In this place, we hear reports of overcrowded housing, failure to meet basic capacity standards, safety standards, and demands so high on work where they can't even use the bathroom. Because to work in this cosmetic company, you have to wear this full gear covered and you're clocked to go to the restroom. And in order for you to use the bathroom, especially if you're female, which most females work in this place, they have to take all this gear, and with all the stress of work, with the stress of removing this chemical suit without any heat, you do your necessities and then traumatized because they're clocking you, because they're not going to pay you as you go to the bathroom. You got to go back quickly and efficiently to do your work. So statistically, a high percentage of undocumented migrants, they report earning less than minimum wage. And this highlights the systematic exploitation facilitated by the lack of legal protection. So, do you believe companies have the right to exploit undocumented migrants? Two wrongs don't make a right. The person that came here legally, we know, we're trying to understand why they came here. And although they did what they had to do, they broke the law when they stayed, but also taking advantage of these individuals is also breaking the law. And two wrongs don't make a right. Let's think about that for a minute. Because as much as we talk about illegal or undocumented migrants need to leave, what are the repercussions of these companies that take advantage of people that are in need and they know it? So this leads me to the corporate ethical anchor. This exploitation is a profound moral failure. While corporate leaders champion and they bluff, claiming to champion labor laws, justice, equality, diversity, and human rights publicly, they profit massively from human exploitation. They do this privately, wearing a persona mask. Both the employer seeking cheaper, less expensive labor and the broken system allowing this desperation is completely wrong. So American companies benefit directly from the lack of a legal pathway. They use this to their advantage. What does this do? It keeps the labor pool cheap and compliant. What is the moral and ethical responsibility of a company? You don't see ICE rating them or any federal agency rating them in the same way ICE rates undocumented migrants. It's sad, but human exploitation and labor through undocumented migrants is a real thing that happens every single day, and no one does anything to fight for this kind of justice. But to better understand this, we also have to understand what is the government policy. The issue is the government policy has taken extreme radical measurements in the name of security, raising serious ethical and constitutional concerns. And don't get me wrong, the government has every right to do this because it feels threatened. It doesn't know what came inside, and it could be polluting the system. It could be creating chaos, as some of the reports are showing that Venezuela gangs are in the United States operating. So I can see why the government is very adamant about this and extreme. But let's understand the scale of enforcement in the last 25 years. The United States government has carried out millions of deportations. So nothing has really changed much. But it reached its peak in 2010, where over 4 million individuals were formally removed from the United States. They were deported. And we're talking about 15 years ago. But what is the human cost to U.S. citizens? Because this enforcement has not been surgical. It's not precise. And this is the sad part, because data also shows us that hundreds of thousands of American-born children, legal U.S. citizens, have been separated from their parents that were undocumented and placed in foster care because one or both parents were deported, or in most cases, they were detained. They're incarcerated in detention centers. This separation is devastating. Is a profound psychological trauma that a child must endure for the rest of their life. And it's inflicted on innocent U.S. citizens in the name of the border integrity. Why does a child, U.S. citizen child, have to pay this high price? Who should be responsible? That is the question. Should there be exceptions to the rules to alleviate the psychological trauma that comes from family separation? Because let's be honest, nobody can replace mom and dad, especially when mom and dad works every day, wake up every morning, puts food on your table, does everything they can, and they trying to put you into college, sacrificing everything, and you see that as a child day by day, and suddenly you're living with another family. Let's think about that for a minute. How will you go about your life? And what will you think about the government? Did they do the right thing for you as a U.S. citizen? Let me know what you think about that question. And when I talk about hundreds of thousands, we're talking about close to 500,000 U.S. citizen children have been affected by this. But it not only leads into psychological distress, the economic hardship is a big factor in their lives as well. And it gets worse if you have immunity. I want to talk about ICE immunity today and the constitutional rights that protect us. Current policies that grant ICE agents broad immunity to arrest anyone, even without initial suspicion. This definitely creates a climate of fear, not only for undocumented migrants, but also for legal residents and including U.S. citizens. Will you want to be stopped just because of your appearance and be treated like you committed a crime just because of your physical appearance or the language you choose to speak in that moment? Isn't that bias? And again, this is implicit bias to the max, to the square root, to determine who is stopped, questioned, interrogated, and in most cases, detained without asking any questions. And what's worse, many U.S. citizens and veterans have been detained. This action challenges the core principle of a due process and basic constitutional protection for all residents. We do not deserve this. I wouldn't want to be stopped by ICE and not even being questioned about if I am a U.S. citizen or not. Worse, if I get arrested, even if I can prove that I am a U.S. citizen, it is degrading, especially if you sacrifice your life being in the military to later, years later, to be detained, interrogated, harassed by ICE. So the ability of the government to arrest any person at any given place at any given time without high probable cause, regardless of citizen status, violates the spirit of the Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights. How could we allow this to happen? If you are a legal resident and U.S. citizen, why haven't we done something to stop this abuse? I, at this point, cannot blame anyone else besides ourselves, because we have done nothing to stop this type of harassment. Because I could understand if this is just targeting undocumented migrants, but this is targeting everyone with immunity to be biased, with immunity to do whatever they are pleased to do. It's not a problem until it happens to you. Remember that. And this also leads me to remember we were talking earlier about that, 10% are bad, 90% are good. I want to debate a little bit about that, because this leads to their hypothesis of let's purge the bad. Because let's think about like the possible 10% that are involved with crime affect the integrity of the 90% that actually does good. But yet everyone is under severe surveillance and risk. So my question is, can we morally justify policies that intentionally violates the rights or dignity of those that do not commit any crime just to catch the small population that is committing the crimes? The fear generated by these policies really degrades the mental health of entire communities, both citizens and not citizens. And the worst thing is there's not even a game plan put in place to treat the traumas caused by ICE today. And it wasn't even thought before this was executed, but later on, because we were not prevented, it's going to cost us much more. Not only financially, ethically, morally, but the worst is when you start trusting in your government. It's the worst feeling, because this is why these undocumented migrants left their country, because they couldn't trust their government. And this is something we shouldn't live with, that kind of fear here in the United States. We deserve better. We definitely deserve better. But we also have to understand that in order to do that, we need to have the integrity and have better game plan to purge the bad from the good. That's like going into a place and justifying that you arrested 100 people in a room while you were just looking for one person. But because you don't have reference of what that person looked, you arrested everyone to catch that one person. Is that justifiable? What do you think the effect of the other 99 people are going to be? How's that going to affect them morally, ethically, psychologically, mentally, emotionally? Let's think about what leadership decisions do to its population. Because again, we were talking about Machiavellian, it's better to be fear than love. This is the tactic that's being used. The government prioritizes fear over constitutional integrity. There's a reason why we created the Constitution, is for our own protection, because we know that fear, it erodes the moral standing necessary to govern. The psychological effect on the populace is a massive crisis of trust. And if you don't trust, you eventually fear. And when you eventually fear, you either fight, flight, or freeze. At some point, after gaining the necessary experience, flight and freeze are going to be taken out of the way, and fight becomes the only way to overcome your fear. And I hope we never get to that point. I hope we're able to, as a civilized citizens, we're able to better our policies so we never have to experience these kind of things. And we have to talk about the possible solutions and the ethical future. The current system is ethically untenable for all parties involved. Let's be honest. We need reforms based on data, human dignity, and the rule of law. What am I proposing? As a short-term solution, we need to start bridging the resource gap. The government must create clear, transparent communication channels that shows how tax dollars are being spent, are being allocated, especially in affected border states, to address the feeling of economic drains among citizens. Simultaneously, robust investment must be made in language and vocational training programs for new arrivals to accelerate assimilation and productivity. I also propose that we should have a psychological education for those that come here legally and illegally, because if once you leave your country, you left because of something that pushed you out. Mental health is key for somebody to assimilate and readapt quicker to its environment. But let's try to do this more as a preventive system of education, psychological education, as opposed to later on when the trauma and the disorders have happened, and now it's a therapy treatment and not a preventive vanguard of how to deal with the emotion so it doesn't become destructive in the process. And as I was thinking about the long-term solution, I always think that merit should be paid. So I proposed a 5-year residency pathway. You don't have to agree with me. Again, I don't have a picture perfect solution, but for those that have been integral in the United States and not have committed any crime, this is what I did. So first is we need a data-driven, merit-based pathway for illegal immigrants already within the country who have demonstrated civic values. This system should grant legal residency if they meet the specific ethical criteria over a 5-year period. First, clean record, no felony or serious misdemeanors committed. I will even throw maybe parking tickets or speeding tickets. Completely clean. As a second category, economic contribution. Payment of all required federal and state taxes. Be up to date. Don't own anything to Uncle Sam. Self-sufficiency. Documented employment without relying on government cash assistance. And trust me, I know it's hard when you start. I know how hard it is, but it doesn't mean you can't do it without this. And I always think if you were able to survive your country without any sort of assistance from your government, I'm pretty sure you can do the same here. Also having a better paid and being safe. And I think also community service integration is very important as a criterion. Evidence of serving the community and also active pursuit of English language education. You must speak the language. Let's be real. This country is a English spoken country. The country shouldn't adapt to you. You need to adapt to the country and its culture and its language. I remember going to Ecuador and I didn't speak any Spanish. Ecuador wasn't going to change their language because of me migrating there. I had to learn their language and it was difficult. It took me over a year to learn it, but that's what I had to do to adapt to that culture and system. So you must put the effort to speak the language. And I get it. There's people that are going to be 70 years old that won't be able to do it, but try. Prove it with paper that you tried your very best and that and even if you don't speak it well, you can understand it and you can communicate somehow in English. Put in the effort in those 5 years. And I want to address legal requirements because we must acknowledge the frustration of those that have to travel back to receive their legal documents. Yes, they have to return back to their country of origin to re-enter to receive their residency. While this is so difficult to understand the why, this step respects the rules of the law because when you migrated illegally, you broke the law. The law was violated. And I like I said, the emotional hardship is understandable. The fear is understandable, but it's very necessary to uphold the integrity of the process for this to work, and illegal immigrants can understand that this is the requirement that must follow. It not only motivates somebody to want to be good, and now they have the proper requirements for how to process their illegal stay into a legal stay. But the issue is there is no such thing. You're illegal, and the only hopes you have if you marry an American citizen or you're sponsored by a company, et cetera, et cetera. But I believe, and I say this with a good heart, that this could probably help. And again, you might have a different opinion, and I respect it. I just say this out of, what I believe could help. This fear factor we have created with, ICE immunity and understanding also why people leave their country. They don't leave it because they're leaving behind comfort. No, they're leaving because they're escaping death, war, famine. They're leaving behind everything they know, everything they love. And they come here and to face, other types of discriminations. And it's not fair for any human being, because I wouldn't want any American going to another country and feeling in this way. And I want to finalize that any American leadership shouldn't be based on fear, but I do believe it should be committed to order and to the dignity of the individuals, especially veterans and citizens and legal residents. We must reject Machiavellian cynicism, because that's what we're seeing today, and build a system that works for the economic system, for the economic security of the citizens, while we can honor human values and dignity for those that are seeking refuge. I know this is a difficult topic to talk about, but we can't cover the sun with our thumbs. And this is something that we have to think about. What is our mental health if we were going through this process? What is the mental health of living in constant fear and insecurity? What is the constant fear of being taken advantage? What is the constant fear of being a refuge? What is the constant fear that you might never be legal? What is the constant fear of going back to your country? What is the constant fear of a company that doesn't respect the labor laws and is abusive? There's so many things that draws into destructive fear. And in order to overcome that destructive fear, it takes a lot of resilience, a lot of love, and integrating yourself in a social network that makes you feel safe as you're going through all this hardship of not knowing what your future can be. And I have a lot of respect for those that don't commit crimes, undocumented migrants that don't commit crime, do the right thing. They've been here 20, 30, 40 years and still don't have any documents. And although they legally are not citizens, they feel like they are, and they contribute. I hope that one day you're able to get what you deserve. And for those that are violating the law as well, that they get what they deserve, because we all have to be responsible of our acts. And for us citizens, for us that have, the privilege of being part of this great nation, that we look at immigration and deportation to unite us to our common goal, to be united. For God's sake, 9/11 united us because we had a common enemy. The question is, do we always need a common enemy to be united as Americans? I can tell you, when you're at war and you're fighting in the trenches and bullets are flying by, you don't care how your brother in arms look. You're there to survive and get through the battle every day. You don't care if they're from Louisiana, from Texas, from New York, from Maine. What you see right next to you is your brother in arms, and you know that you depend on that person just like he depends on you. And we emulate that in our society today to do what's best, not only for the country, but for our future, where we can be constructive in this chaotic event, but bring a solution that brings us back to order, but also into dignifying what is to be an American. Thank you for walking with us today. And don't forget to subscribe. Your subscription will drive mental health services for free for those that are suffering and can't afford therapies. Your subscription becomes a lifeline. Don't forget that. And leave a comment, and we will see you next time. Don't forget that united, we serve ourselves better and we become indestructible. Thank you. Welcome back again at Thick Skill Podcast, where we explore human experiences. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do not forget our campaign. We are committed to transform your subscriptions into pro bono programs for mental health. So you can free somebody's mind from their traumas and help them heal just by subscribing. Very simple, and it costs absolutely nothing. Help us through this campaign, and we just want to pay forward, not only to our viewers, but for those that can't afford mental health services. Just remember, the statistics are real. Only 4 out of 10 Americans can afford mental health services. So help us change that. Hopefully, we can move the statistics and perhaps move it from 4 to 5 out of 10 people have good mental health.